Maxwell Reed's world stopped when the waitress's haunting melody cut through the restaurant's quiet hum, a voice identical to his long-dead wife's unleashing 30 years of buried secrets. The song that once brought him joy now exposed a web of family betrayal, murder, and the niece he never knew existed. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. A single note can resurrect ghosts you've spent a lifetime burying. For Maxwell Reed, a man whose wealth had built impenetrable walls around his heart, that note came on an ordinary Tuesday evening in a restaurant he never planned to visit. For Sophia Adler, a waitress with dreams bigger than her bank account, it was just another song to help her through a shift. She was fighting to keep her grandmother in a care facility that cost more per month than she made in a year. He was dining alone, escaping a corporate acquisition that would add another billion to his fortune. But when her voice drifted through the elegant dimness of Belafonte's, the fortress Maxwell had spent 30 years constructing crumbled in seconds. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a melody in an upscale restaurant unearthed a secret that one of America's most powerful men thought was buried forever. The soft lighting of Belafonte's cast gentle shadows across Maxwell Reed's table as he absently pushed the remains of his seared scallops around the handcrafted ceramic plate. At 58, Maxwell had perfected the art of dining alone, of being simultaneously seen and unseen. His tailored Brioni suit and the quiet deference of the staff marked him as important, but his practiced aloofness kept anyone from approaching unnecessarily. The acquisition papers sat in a slim leather portfolio beside his plate. Foster Medical Technologies, a promising biotech firm with revolutionary cancer treatment patents. By tomorrow afternoon, it would belong to Reed Global. Another victory, another empty triumph. The sommelier had just refilled his glass with a Montrachet that cost more than most people's monthly rent when he heard it. A voice, sweet and clear, drifting from the back of the restaurant where the staff was clearing tables from a private event. All the things you are, ... are mine to treasure, ... Single quotes. Maxwell's hand froze mid-air, wine glass suspended. The voice continued, unaware of its effect, floating through the restaurant like a ghost made of sound. The touch of your hand is heaven's caress, ... Single quotes. His glass slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering against the pristine tablecloth. Red wine bloomed like blood across the white fabric. Maxwell didn't notice. The voice had transported him 30 years into the past, to another restaurant, another song, another woman, Elena. Across the room, Sophia Adler stopped singing immediately at the sound of breaking glass. She looked up from the table she was clearing to see a distinguished older gentleman staring at her as if he'd seen a specter. His face had gone ashen, his hand frozen in mid-air. "I'm so sorry," she murmured to Pierre, the floor manager. "I know we're not supposed to sing on the main floor." Pierre shook his head dismissively. "It's fine. That's Maxwell Reed. If he complained about the singing of angels themselves, we'd tell the angels to be quiet. But he doesn't look angry. He looks ... haunted," Sophia supplied. Maxwell was indeed haunted. The voice had ripped open a carefully sealed chamber in his heart, and now memories were flooding out, drowning him. Elena singing that same song in their tiny apartment in Queens. Elena in a simple white dress at City Hall. Elena's tearful face the last time he saw her alive. As the staff rushed to clean up the spilled wine, Maxwell found his voice. "Who was singing?" The manager appeared at his elbow. "My sincerest apologies for the disturbance, Mr. Reed. I'll ensure the singing." Maxwell interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "Who was singing?" That was just one of our waitstaff, sir. I assure you, she's been reminded of our policy." Maxwell's eyes scanned the room until they found her. A young woman in her 20s. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, standard black server's uniform. Nothing like Elena physically, and yet, "Send her over, sir." The waitress who was singing. "Send her to my table." The manager nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Reed." Sophia approached the table with trepidation. Working at Belafonte's had taught her to recognize wealth and power, and Maxwell Reed radiated both like a nuclear reactor. His face was familiar from business magazines and charity. Gallus, the kind of man who could buy and sell the entire restaurant on a whim. "You wanted to see me, sir?" she asked, keeping her voice professional despite her racing heart. Maxwell looked up at her, his eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her want to step back. "That song," he said, his voice strained. "Where did you learn it?" The question caught her off guard. "My grandmother taught it to me. She raised me and she always sang that when she was happy." "Your grandmother," Maxwell repeated. "What's her name?" Sophia shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the angry reprimand she'd expected, but it was somehow worse. There was a desperation in his eyes that seemed wildly out of place on a man like him. "Margaret Adler, though she was Margaret Chun before she married." "And your mother?" The personal questions were crossing a line, but something in his expression kept her answering. "Catherine Adler. She died when I was 3. Maxwell's hand moved to cover his mouth, his eyes suddenly glistening with unshed tears. The gesture was so vulnerable, so unexpected from a man of his stature, that Sophia felt as though she was witnessing something intensely private. "I knew her," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Your mother." "I knew Catherine." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sophia's feet. "You knew my mother? How?" Maxwell gestured to the chair across from it. "Please, sit, sir. I'm working. I can't just I'll speak with your manager, please. Sophia slowly lowered herself into the chair, suddenly aware of the other diners watching with curious eyes. A billionaire inviting a waitress to join him for dinner was exactly the kind of gossip that kept Manhattan's elite entertained for weeks. How did you know my mother? She repeated. Maxwell looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher: grief, wonder, and something that looked almost like guilt. She was my sister-in-law, he said finally. My wife Elena's younger sister. Sophia stared at him, uncomprehending. That's not possible. My mother didn't have a sister, and my grandmother never mentioned anyone named Elena. She wouldn't have, Maxwell said, his voice hollow. After what happened after Elena died, there was a ... separation. Your grandmother blamed me, perhaps rightly so. This doesn't make any sense, Sophia said, feeling dizzy. My grandmother would have told me if my mother had a sister, if I had family out there. Maxwell's eyes never left her face. Your eyes, he murmured. They're exactly like hers. Like Elena's. A waiter approached with a fresh glass of wine, and Maxwell waved him away without looking. His attention was fixed entirely on Sophia, as if she might disappear if he blinked. I think you have me confused with someone else, Sophia said, preparing to stand. This was too strange, too unsettling. I should get back to work. You have a birthmark, Maxwell said suddenly. On your left shoulder blade, a small crescent moon shape. Sophia froze. How could you possibly know that? Because Catherine had the same one. It runs in the Chun family. Elena used to say it was because their ancestors were blessed by the moon goddess. The certainty drained from Sophia, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. No one knew about her birthmark except her grandmother, who called it her little moon. It wasn't visible in any of her social media photos. There was no way this man could know about it unless ... Who are you? I told you. I was married to your mother's sister. He drew a deep breath, seeming to brace himself. But that's not all. Catherine never told you about your father, did she? My grandmother said he wasn't in the picture, that he left before I was born. Maxwell nodded slowly. That's partially true. He wasn't in the picture, but not by choice. He never knew about you. What are you saying? Sophia asked, her voice barely audible over the ambient restaurant noise. I'm saying, Maxwell replied, each word deliberate and heavy with meaning, that the man who should have been your father, the man who would have moved heaven and earth to be your father, if he had known, was my brother, James Reed. The restaurant seemed to fall away around them. Sophia felt as if she were in free fall, untethered from everything she had believed about herself and her history. That's not possible, she repeated, but with less conviction. Your mother and my brother were engaged, Maxwell continued. They kept it secret because our family, my father would have never approved. James was going to give up everything, his inheritance, his position in the family, to be with her. But then there was the accident. What accident? Sophia asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Maxwell's eyes clouded with old pain. The same one that took Elena from me. A yacht capsized during a storm off the coast of Maine. Elena and James were both lost. I was the only survivor. His voice broke. Catherine was supposed to be there too, but she'd called last minute to say she was feeling ill. We didn't know. ... No one knew she was pregnant with you. Sophia's mind raced through the implication. If what he was saying was true, and the detail about her birthmark made it hard to dismiss, then this man, this billionaire sitting across from her looking devastated, was her uncle by marriage. And she was a Reed by blood, connected to one of the wealthiest families in America. Why didn't my grandmother tell me any of this? She asked, her voice trembling. Margaret blamed our family for the act. She believed my father had sabotaged the yacht because he disapproved of James marrying Catherine. There was an investigation, but nothing was ever proven. Maxwell's eyes were haunted. After the funerals, she took Catherine and disappeared. By the time I tracked them down years later, Catherine had died, and Margaret made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with the Reed family. She threatened to go public with her suspicions about the accident if I didn't stay away. So you just ... left me there. Never checked on me? Never tried to help? Maxwell flinched as if she'd struck him. I respected Margaret's wishes, and I set up a trust fund in your name that she refused to touch. I've had people checking on you from a distance, making sure you were safe, but I promised never to interfere in your life. Then why are you telling me all this now? Sophia demanded. Maxwell looked at her, his composure cracking further. Because when I heard you singing Elena's favorite song in her voice, I couldn't keep the promise anymore. His hand trembled as he reached for the leather portfolio. And because Margaret called my office last week. What? She's dying, Sophia. And she doesn't want to leave this world with you not knowing the truth. Sophia's world tilted on its axis. The elegant restaurant around her, a place where she had always been invisible, just another server in black and white, suddenly felt surreal. She stared at the man across from her, searching his features for any resemblance to her own, any confirmation of this impossible story. My grandmother is dying? She finally managed, her voice barely audible. Maxwell nodded gravely. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She contacted my office through her lawyer last week. I didn't know it was her until I heard the name Margaret Chun Adler. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. She asked me to give you this when the time came. I've been carrying it with, trying to decide how to approach you. Sophia didn't reach for the envelope. Her hands remained flat on the table as if letting go might cause her to float away from this moment, this reality that was rapidly unraveling around her. I visit her every day at Lakeside Care Center, she said, her voice wooden. She never said anything about cancer, about you, about any of this. She's a proud woman, Maxwell replied. And she's protected you from my family for 28 years. Pierre appeared at Maxwell's elbow, concern etched on his face. Is everything all right, Mr. Reed? Can I get you anything else? Maxwell's eyes never left Sophia's face. Ms. Adler will be taking the rest of the evening off. Please ensure her full shift is compensated, plus a generous gratuity. He reached for his wallet. And I'd appreciate your discretion regarding our conversation. Pierre nodded quickly, professional mask firmly in place despite his obvious curiosity. Of course, sir. He turned to Sophia. Take all the time you need. When they were alone again, Sophia found her voice. You can't just walk into my life and rearrange everything. I have responsibilities. Rent due next week. My grandmother's care facility bills, all of which I can help, Maxwell said quietly. I don't want your money, Sophia snapped, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. I've managed for 28 years without the Reed fortune. A flicker of respect, or was it pride, crossed Maxwell's face. You have your mother's spirit. He pushed the envelope toward her. This isn't for me. It's for Margaret. Sophia stared at the cream-colored envelope. Her grandmother's familiar, elegant handwriting spelled out her name. With trembling fingers, she picked it up, feeling as though she were accepting some kind of Pandora's box. What does it say? She asked, not opening it. I don't know. She asked me to deliver it sealed. Maxwell hesitated, but I imagine it contains the truth she's kept from both of us. Sophia slipped the envelope into her pocket. I need to talk to her. Before I read this, before I decide whether to believe any of what you're saying. Of course, and I need to finish my shift. Maxwell looked surprised. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Sophia stood abruptly. This is my life, Mr. Reed, the one I've built, the one that's real to me, and until I understand what's happening, I'm not changing a single thing about it. She walked away from the table, back straight, head high, though her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She didn't look back to see Maxwell's expression, didn't want to see the pity or the judgment or whatever else might be written there. In the kitchen, she found Pierre. I'm staying, she told him firmly. But Mr. Reed doesn't dictate my schedule. I'll finish my shift. Pierre looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sophia's expression stopped him. He nodded once. As you wish. For the next 2 hours, Sophia moved through Belafonte's in a daze, taking orders, delivering food, clearing tables. Her body operated on autopilot while her mind whirled with questions. Maxwell Reed remained at his table long after his meal was finished, nursing a glass of scotch, his eyes following her movements. She avoided his gaze, focused on her tasks with an intensity that bordered on obsession. When her shift finally ended at 11, she changed out of her uniform in the employee restroom, her fingers brushing against the envelope in her pocket. She hadn't decided whether to read it yet. Maxwell was waiting by the staff exit, a black town car idling at the curb behind him. I can drive you to the care facility, he said without preamble. It's late, but I called ahead. They'll let us in to see Margaret. Sophia hesitated. How do you know where she is? I've known for years, Maxwell admitted. I keep track of both of you, from a distance. The revelation should have felt invasive, but instead Sophia felt a strange sort of comfort knowing she hadn't been completely alone in the world. I'll take the subway, she said. Sophia. Maxwell's voice was gentle but firm. It's almost midnight. The subway is a 40-minute ride to Lakeside, and then another 10-minute walk. My driver can have us there in 20 minutes. Practicality won out over pride. Fine. The interior of the town car was plush leather and subtle wood grain. Sophia sat as far from Maxwell as possible, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. The envelope seemed to burn in her pocket. Tell me about her, Maxwell said after a long silence. About growing up with Margaret. Sophia kept her eyes on the passing streetlights. Why? 'Cause I've missed everything. 28 years of your life. That was your choice, Sophia said, turning to face him. You said you knew where we were. You could have reached out and broken my promise to your grandmother. Maxwell shook his head. Margaret made it clear what would happen if I interfered. She would have taken you and disappeared again. So instead you... What? Had people spy on us? Not spy, Maxwell corrected. Observe, make sure you were safe, that you had what you need. We struggled, Sophia said bluntly. Grandma worked 2 jobs until her arthritis got too bad. I started waiting tables at 16 to help with rent. I got a partial scholarship to City College but had to drop out after 2 years because we couldn't afford the rest. So whatever making sure we had what we needed meant to you, it wasn't enough. Maxwell's face tightened with genuine pain. The trust fund, the one she refused to touch? Did you ever think about why? What that money would have meant to her? Blood money, Maxwell said softly. That's what she called it when I tried to give it to her directly. She said it was stained with Elena's and James's blood. The car fell silent again. Sophia felt a flicker of guilt for her harshness. This man had lost his wife and brother in the same accident, and according to his story, had honored her grandmother's wishes for nearly 3 decades. However imperfectly. She did her best, Sophia said finally. Grandma, she gave me everything she could. Made sure I had music lessons when I showed interest, even when it meant working extra shifts. Taught me to be proud of my Chinese heritage. Told me stories about my mother, how kind she was, how talented. She paused, but she never mentioned a sister. Or the Reeds. What did she tell you about your father? Sophia shrugged. Not much. That he was a good man who wasn't in the picture. I always assumed they had a brief relationship and he left before finding out about me. James would have moved heaven and earth to be in your life, Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. He was the better of us, the kinder one. Always fighting for what was right, even when it meant standing against our father. The car slowed as they approached Lakeside Care Center, a modern facility set back from the road. its windows glowing softly in the night. "Before we go in," Maxwell said, "you should know that I've been covering your grandmother's medical expenses for the past 6 months. Sophia turned to him, shocked. "What? How?" "I've been paying the bills myself. Every month I write a check for $5,000, Maxwell finished, which covers about a quarter of the actual cost for the level of care she's received. The facility has been instructed to accept that amount as payment in full and bill the remainder to a foundation I established." Anger flared in Sophia's chest. "You had no right." "I had every right," Maxwell interrupted, his voice suddenly hard. "She's family, the only living connection to Elena besides you. I couldn't save my wife or my brother, but I could at least ensure Margaret had proper care in her final days." The words hung in the air between them. Sophia wanted to argue, to rage against this presumptuous intervention in their lives, but the simple truth of his statement, "she's family," deflated her anger. Whatever else Maxwell Reed might be, he was a man who honored the bonds of family even when those bonds were stretched almost to breaking. The care facility was quiet, the night staff moving efficiently through their rounds. The head nurse, Ms. Thompson, greeted them in the lobby, her professional demeanor slipping slightly at the sight of Maxwell Reed. "Mr. Reed," she said, "we weren't expecting you at this hour." "I appreciate your accommodation," Maxwell replied. "We won't disturb Miss Adler for long." "She's actually awake, Ms." Thompson said, addressing Sophia. "She was asking for you earlier." Sophia felt a pang of guilt. "I was working. She understands." Ms. Thompson led them down a corridor decorated with tasteful artwork. "She's been reading in the solarium. She prefers it to her room in the evenings." The solarium was a glass-enclosed garden space filled with tropical plants and comfortable seating. Margaret Adler sat in a recliner near a small fountain, a book open in her lap. At 79, she was still beautiful, her silver hair swept up in an elegant knot, her posture perfect even in illness. The only signs of her condition were the pronounced hollows of her cheeks and the fragile thinness of her wrist. She looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Maxwell beside her granddaughter. For a moment, she seemed to shrink back, as if expecting a confrontation. Then her shoulders straightened, and a look of resigned acceptance crossed her face. "So," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "you've finally met." Sophia rushed to her grandmother's side, kneeling beside the chair. "Grandma, why didn't you tell me? About the cancer? About everything?" Margaret's hand, cool and paper-thin, came to rest on Sophia's cheek. There never seemed to be the right time, and then suddenly there was no time left. "You should have told me," Sophia insisted, tears threatening. "I could have..." "Done what?" Margaret asked gently. "Worried more? Worked yourself to death trying to afford treatments that wouldn't change the outcome?" She shook her head. "No, my darling. That's not what I wanted for you." Her eyes moved past Sophia to Maxwell, who stood awkwardly at the entrance to the solarium. "Maxwell," she said, her voice cooling slightly. "You look well, Margaret." He stepped forward. "You're as formidable as ever." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Even dying, yes." She gestured to a chair opposite her. "Sit since you're here. We might as well talk like civilized people." Maxwell took the offered seat while Sophia remained kneeling beside her grandmother, one hand clasping Margaret's frail fingers. "I gave her the envelope," Maxwell said. "She hasn't opened it yet." Margaret nodded. "I thought it might be easier to read first before asking questions. But here we are." She turned to Sophia. "What has he told you?" "That my mother had a sister named Elena, that Elena was married to him, and my mother was engaged to his brother James, that they died in a boating accident." Sophia's voice caught. "That James was my father." "All true," Margaret confirmed, "though that's hardly the whole story. Why keep it from me? All these years." Margaret's eyes grew distant. "Because the truth wouldn't have set you free, Sophia. It would have chained you to a legacy of pain and greed. I wanted more for you than to be defined by the Reed name and all that comes with it." "But they were my family," Sophia protested. "I was your family," Margaret replied, a rare flash of fierceness in her voice. "And I protected you the only way I knew how, by keeping you far from Alexander Reed and his poison." "Alexander Reed," Maxwell said, his voice hollow. "My father." The name hung in the solarium like a dark cloud. Sophia looked between her grandmother and Maxwell, feeling the weight of decades of resentment and fear. "Who was he?" she asked. Margaret's eyes met Maxwell's. A silent question passed between them. "Tell her," Margaret said. "Tell her what kind of man your father was." Maxwell's shoulders sagged as if the burden of truth was physically heavy. "Alexander Reed was ruthless, a self-made billionaire who built Reed Industries from nothing. He saw the world as a battlefield and business as war. He was a monster." Margaret interjected, her voice sharpening. "A man who destroyed lives without remorse if they stood in his path." "Grandma," Sophia said, surprised by the venom in her typically gentle grandmother's voice. "She's not wrong," Maxwell admitted. "My father believed that power was the only thing that mattered in this world. He taught James and me that lesson from childhood. Only James never accepted it." "James was the good one," Margaret said, her eyes softening. "The one who saw through his father's cruelty." "What happened?" Sophia asked. "With the accident?" A heavy silence filled the solarium. Maxwell's face seemed to age before her eyes. "We were celebrating," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Elena and I had been married for 3 years. James had just proposed to Catherine. It was supposed to be a weekend of family and joy. On Alexander's yacht," Margaret added bitterly. Maxwell nodded. "My father had grudgingly accepted that he couldn't prevent the marriage. James was persistent. When Catherine called to say she was feeling ill, We should have postponed, but my father insisted we continue with the celebratory cruise. The weather was clear when we left the harbor, Maxwell continued, his eyes distant with memory. The storm came out of nowhere. At least that's what I believed for years. What do you mean? Sophia asked, her heart pounding. The Coast Guard investigation concluded it was an accident, Maxwell said. A sudden squall. A navigational error. The yacht capsized. Alina and James were below deck. I was thrown clear, picked up by a passing fishing boat, but you don't believe that anymore, Sophia said, reading his expression. Maxwell met Margaret's eyes. I didn't want to believe Margaret's accusations. That my father would ... that he could ... kill his own son, Margaret finished, and his daughter-in-law, all to prevent James from marrying a Chinese girl who would pollute the Reed bloodline? Sophia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. There was no proof, Maxwell said, but his voice lacked conviction. There never is, with men like Alexander, Margaret replied. But we knew, Catherine knew. That's why she ran when she discovered she was pregnant. Why she came to me instead of to you, Maxwell. She was terrified Alexander would kill her baby too if he learned of its existence. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Sophia felt dizzy, sick with the implications. Did you believe it? She asked Maxwell. That your father murdered them? Maxwell's hands clenched in his lap. Not at first. I couldn't bear to think. But over the years things came to light. Inconsistencies in the navigational logs. The captain who mysteriously received a small fortune shortly after the accident and disappeared to South America. The weather reports that showed no indication of a storm system, and yet you continued working for him, Margaret said, accusation heavy in her voice. Building his empire, becoming him. I was lost, Maxwell said simply. Elena was gone. James was gone. The company was all I had left. And your conscience? Margaret asked. Did that drown with them too? Grandma, Sophia said, laying a hand on Margaret's arm. Please. Maxwell stood abruptly and walked to the glass wall of the solarium, staring out into the darkness. Margaret is right to hate me, he said. I suspected the truth, but I buried it. Buried myself in work, in acquisitions and mergers, in becoming exactly what my father wanted me to be. And how did that work out for you, Maxwell? Margaret asked, her voice softening with something like pity. Are you happy with the man you've become? Maxwell didn't answer. His reflection in the glass showed a face lined with grief and regret. He died 12 years ago, he said finally. My father. Heart attack on the golf course. Quite peaceful, all things considered. Voice was bitter. I stood at his funeral and accepted condolences while thinking about James and Elena, who never had proper graves. Their bodies were never recovered. Did you ever confront him? Sophia asked. About what you suspected? Maxwell turned back to face them, his expression haggard. Once, about 5 years after the accident, he laughed, said I was becoming sentimental, that it would make me weak. That business required sacrifices. He swallowed hard. He never explicitly admitted anything. He didn't have to, and that's why he kept you hidden, Margaret said to Sophia. Because even with Alexander gone, his shadow hung over everything the Reeds touched. I couldn't risk it. Sophia's mind reeled, trying to process the enormity of what she was hearing. A grandfather she never knew, potentially responsible for killing her father before she was born. A family legacy built on ruthlessness and possibly murder. And her uncle, the man standing before her, now caught in the middle, simultaneously victim and accomplice. The money, she said suddenly, understanding dawning. The trust fund you set up for me. The care facility bills you've been paying. It's not just family obligation, it's guilt. Maxwell flinched as if struck. Not just guilt, he said, though there's plenty of that. It's ... atonement. Too little, too late. And the envelope? Sophia asked, turning to her grandmother. What's in it that you couldn't tell me yourself? Margaret sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of decades. Proof, she said simply. Everything I gathered over the years about the accident. Bank records showing payments to the yacht's captain. Weather reports from that day. Testimony from a former Reed Industries executive who overheard Alexander making threats against James if he went through with the marriage. You've had this all along? Maxwell asked, stunned. Why didn't you go to the authorities? With what? Circumstantial evidence against one of the most powerful men in America? Margaret shook her head. I had Catherine to protect, and then Sophia. Going public would have painted targets on our back. But now? Sophia asked. Now I'm dying, Margaret said matter-of-factly. And you deserve to know the truth, to decide for yourself what to do with it. She reached for Sophia's hand, clasping it tightly between her frail fingers. I kept you safe. I gave you as normal a life as I could, but I also kept you from half of your heritage, from family who might have loved you. Her eyes flicked to Maxwell. Some of them, at least. James would have adored her, Maxwell said softly. He always wanted children, and Elena would have been the most doting aunt, Margaret added, unexpected tears filling her eyes. My Kathy idolized her sister. They were so close, despite the age difference. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, united in grief for the family that should have been. What happens now? Sophia finally asked. Maxwell looked at her, his expression uncertain. That depends on you, on what you want. I don't know what I want, Sophia admitted. This is all ... Overwhelming. You don't have to decide anything tonight, Margaret said. The envelope contains more than just evidence. There are photos, letters, things of your parents that I saved. Their story in their own words. She smiled sadly. I may have kept you from the Reeds, but I never wanted to keep you from knowing who your parents were. I'd like to see them, Sophia said quietly. The photos. Margaret nodded to the envelope still in Sophia's pocket. They're in there, along with something else. Something I've kept for you since the day you were born. Sophia withdrew the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavier than she expected, as if weighted with more than just paper. She broke the seal and tipped the contents into her lap. Photographs spilled out faded color snapshots from another time. A handsome young man with Maxwell's jawline but softer eyes, his arm around a beautiful young Chinese woman. The same couple on a beach, laughing into the camera. A group shot of 4 people, the couple, along with another woman who looked remarkably like Sophia's mother, and a younger version of Maxwell. That's them, Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion. James and Catherine, and Elena and me. Single quotes. Sophia's fingers traced the faces in the photos. These strangers who were her blood. Her mother, younger than Sophia, was now her face alight with happiness. And her father, a man she had never known existed until tonight. They were so young, she whispered. Both 23, Margaret confirmed, just starting their lives. Among the photos was a small velvet box. Sophia opened it slowly, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. James gave that to Catherine when he proposed, Margaret said. She wasn't wearing it the day of the yacht trip. Her fingers were swollen from early pregnancy, though she didn't know it yet. It's the only thing of his that survived. Sophia stared at the ring, this tangible connection to the father she never knew. It's beautiful. He had it designed specially for her, Maxwell said. The pearl because she loved the ocean. The diamonds arranged like stars because he said she lit up his sky. Sophia slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. There's more, Margaret said. Letters they wrote to each other. A journal Catherine kept during their relationship. I want you to have it all. To know the love that created you. What about the evidence? Maxwell asked. Against my father? Margaret's expression hardened. That's for Sophia to decide what to do with. Her legacy, her family history, her choice whether to pursue justice or let the past rest. Justice? Sophia repeated. After all this time? There's no statute of limitations on murder, Margaret said. If that's the path you choose. Maxwell didn't protest. His face was grim but resigned. Whatever you decide, I'll support you, he said to Sophia. Even if it means destroying everything I've built. Why would you do that? Sophia asked, genuinely confused. Because James would have, Maxwell answered simply. Because it's what Elena would have wanted. And because I've spent 30 years building a life on a foundation of silence and complicity. Maybe it's time that ended. Sophia looked down at the ring on her finger, at the photos of the parents she never knew, at the grandmother who had sacrificed everything to keep her safe, and at the uncle who carried the weight of an impossible choice on his shoulders. I need time, she said finally, to read everything, to think. Of course, Maxwell said. Can I want to hear more? She continued. About them, about Elena and James, about my mother. Not just the tragedy, but who they were, their dreams, the small thing. Margaret smiled. A genuine smile that momentarily erased the lines of pain and illness from her face. I would like that very much, and I'm staying here tonight, Sophia added, with my grandmother. Maxwell nodded. Understanding. I'll have my driver bring anything you need from your apartment. He moved toward the door, then paused. Sophia, he said, not turning around. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but when you've read everything, when you've decided what you want to do, will you let me know? Sophia looked at this stranger who was her only living connection to her father. This powerful man brought low by the weight of family secrets and decades of guilt. Yes, she said, I will. As Maxwell left, Sophia settled beside her grandmother, the photo spread between them, the ring glinting on her finger. Outside the glass walls of the solarium, the night pressed close, but inside, illuminated by soft lights and surrounded by green growing things, grandmother and granddaughter began the long process of reconstructing a family shattered 30 years ago. Dawn crept into the solarium, painting Margaret's sleeping form in soft gold. Sophia hadn't slept. She'd spent the night reading through the contents of the envelope letters exchanged between her parents, her mother's journal entries, newspaper clippings about the accident, and the damning evidence Margaret had collected against Alexander read. The letters revealed a love story that felt both achingly familiar and completely alien. Her father's handwriting was confident and flowing, full of dreams and plans for their future. Her mother's responses were more measured but radiated quiet joy. They wrote of simple pleasures walks in Central Park, late-night conversations over cheap wine, dreams of traveling the world together. And they wrote of obstacles, James's father's disapproval, the pressure of the Reed name, Catherine's concerns about fitting into James's world. You're still awake. Sophia looked up to find her grandmother watching her, eyes clear despite the early hour. I couldn't stop reading, Sophia admitted, gesturing to the papers spread across her lap. They loved each other so much. Margaret pushed herself up slightly against her pillow. They did. It was the kind of love poets write about, rare and true and uncompromising. Sophia held up one of the letters. He writes here about taking her to this little restaurant in Queens. Angelo's. He says it was their special place. Yes, Margaret smiled. Your mother worked there as a hostess while she was in college. That's where they met. James came in with business associates. saw Catherine, and kept finding excuses to come back. When he finally asked her out, she turned him down 3 times before saying yes. Why? He thought he was just a rich boy slumming it, looking for an exotic fling. Margaret's eyes crinkled at the corners. It took her time to see who he really was, a gentle soul beneath the expensive suit. Sophia fingered the pearl engagement ring she still wore. The restaurant is it still there? I don't know, Margaret admitted. I avoided anything connected to that time. It was too painful. Sophia nodded, understanding now her grandmother's need to compartmentalize the past, to protect herself and her granddaughter from the weight of what had happened. And the song, Sophia said quietly, the one I was singing in the restaurant when Maxwell heard me. My mother used to sing it to me, didn't she? Not you. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Yes, Catherine sang it to you when you were a baby. I could never bear to sing it myself. It was Elena's song originally. She had the voice of an angel, and Catherine adored her sister's singing. After they died, Catherine would sing it to you as a lullaby. She wiped away a tear. When she passed, I couldn't bring myself to continue the tradition, but somehow you remembered the melody. You were humming it when you were 3, and I couldn't bear to stop. Sophia thought of Maxwell's reaction in the restaurant. The shattered glass, the look of absolute shock on his face. He hadn't just recognized the song, he'd recognized the voice. Her voice, which somehow carried echoes of both her mother and her aunt. I need to see him again, she said suddenly. Maxwell, there's still so many questions. Are you sure that's what you want? Margaret asked, searching her face. You don't owe him anything, Sophia, I know, but I owe myself the truth, all of it. She gathered the papers carefully. And I need to see this place. Angelo's. I need to walk where they walked. Margaret nodded, resignation mingling with understanding in her expression. Just promise me one thing, she said, taking Sophia's hand. Whatever you discover, whatever you decide to do with the evidence against Alexander Reed, don't let it consume you. Your parents would want you to live your life, not be dragged down by the past. I promise, Sophia said, squeezing her grandmother's frail hand. I'm going to find Maxwell, and then I'm going to find Angelo's. Maxwell hadn't slept either. He'd returned to his penthouse overlooking Central Park, poured himself a scotch he didn't drink, and spent the night staring at old photographs he'd kept hidden for 30 years. Images of a happier time, Elena laughing on a beach, James and Maxwell as young men standing shoulder to shoulder, the 4 of them at the engagement party the week before the accident. He was still sitting there when his phone rang at 7 a.m. Mr. Reed, it's Sophia Adler. I'd like to see you. Maxwell's heart lurched. Of course. Where and when? There's a place called Angelo's in Queens. Did you know it? The name hit him like a physical blow. Yes, he said softly. I knew it. Is it still there? It is. The original owner's son runs it now. A pause. It was where James and Catherine met. I know. Can you meet me there at noon? I'll be there. The line went dead and Maxwell sat for a long moment, phone still in hand. Angelo's, the little Italian restaurant where his brother had fallen in love, the place Maxwell had avoided for 30 years because the memories were too painful. He pulled himself together, showered and dressed with mechanical precision. His assistant was surprised to hear him cancel all appointments for the day, something Maxwell Reed simply didn't do. But one look at his face silenced any questions. The town car dropped him at Angelo's at 11:45. The restaurant looked much the same as it. 3 decades earlier, a modest storefront with red-checked curtains and a hand-painted sign. Maxwell stood on the sidewalk, momentarily paralyzed by memory. The last time he'd been here was for James and Catherine's engagement dinner. Small, intimate affair away from the scrutiny of the Reed social circle. Elena had been radiant that night, so happy for her sister. James had never looked more alive, and Maxwell had been quietly envious of his brother's courage, his willingness to defy their father for love. You've been here before. Maxwell turned to find Sophia standing behind him, her expression unreadable. Many times, he admitted, though not since ... single quote, since before they died, she finished. He nodded, taking in her appearance. She looked exhausted but determined, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back. She was carrying a tote bag that he suspected contained the contents of Margaret's envelope. Shall we? She asked, gesturing to the door. The interior of Angelo's was warm and inviting, brick walls, wooden tables covered with red-checked cloths, the scent of garlic and basil in the air. An older man in his 60s looked up from behind the bar and did a double take. Mr. Reed? He asked, astonishment clear in his voice. Maxwell Reed? Maxwell forced a smile. Hello, Tony. It's been a long time. The man Tony Angelo, son of the original owner, hurried over, wiping his hands on his apron. 30 years, give or take. I never thought I'd see you here again after what happened. His eyes slid to Sophia, curious. This is Sophia Adler, Maxwell said. James and Catherine's daughter. Tony's mouth fell open. He stared at Sophia, recognition dawning in his eyes. God, he whispered, you look just like her, like both of them somehow. You knew my parents? Sophia asked. Knew them? They were family here. Tony's face lit up with genuine warmth. Your mother worked for my father for almost 2 years, and your father, he would come in 3 times a week just to see her, always requesting to sit in her section. The love story of Angelo's, we called. He led them to a corner booth, worn but clean, with a view of both the bar and the small stage where a piano sat. Their table, Tony said simply. It's always been the James and Catherine table to us. My father wouldn't let anyone else sit here for months after we heard. He took their order, just coffee, and left them alone, sensing the weight of the moment. It feels strange, Sophia said, looking around. Being here where it all began. James loved this place, Maxwell said. not just because of Catherine. He said it was one of the few places where he felt real, where he wasn't James Reed, heir to Reed Industries, but just James. My mother's journal says the same thing, Sophia said, pulling out a small leather-bound book from her tote. She wrote that he was different here, more himself. Maxwell's eyes fixed on the journal. May I? Sophia hesitated, then passed it across the table. Maxwell handled it reverently, opening to where a bookmark had been placed. James took me to the Met today, he read aloud, his voice soft. Not the main galleries where everyone would recognize him, but the medieval collection that he says no one visits. He knows every piece, every story. His eyes light up when he talks about the craftsmanship, the history. This is the man I'm falling in love with, not the businessman in the tailored suit, but the secret scholar who can spend hours looking at ancient metalwork and illuminated manuscripts. Maxwell closed the journal gently. That was James, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Always interested in everything except what our father wanted him to be interested in. Art, history, literature. He studied business because he had to, but his passion was always elsewhere. Unlike you, Sophia observed. Maxwell met her gaze. Yes, unlike me. I was the dutiful son, the one who embraced the Reed legacy. James was the dreamer, the one who questioned everything. His mouth twisted in a bitter smile. The better man by far. And Alina? Sophia asked. My aunt? What was she like? Maxwell's expression softened. Elena was ... radiant, brilliant. She was studying to be a concert pianist when I met her. She had this laugh that could fill a room, and a voice that could break your heart. He looked at Sophia. Your voice. That's why you dropped your glass that night at Belafonte's. You thought you heard her. For a moment I thought I was losing my mind, Maxwell admitted. The resemblance is uncanny. Not just the tone, but the way you phrase the notes. Tony returned with their coffee and a plate of cannoli he insisted they try. On the house, he said, for old time's sake. When he'd gone, Sophia pulled more papers from her bag, the evidence Margaret had collected. I've read everything, she said. About the accident, about what your father might have done. Maxwell's expression grew grim. And I don't know what to do with it, she admitted. 30 years have passed, your father is dead. What would justice even look like now? That depends on what you want, Maxwell said. The evidence could still damage Reed Industries. The scandal would be enormous. The company might survive, but its reputation would never recover. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? Sophia countered. It's your company now, your legacy. Maxwell stared into his coffee cup as if seeking answers in its depths. What I want, he said slowly, is what I've wanted every day for 30 years. To have Elena back. To have James back. To have made different choices. He looked up at Sophia. But since I can't have that, I want whatever brings you peace. Sophia studied Maxwell's face, searching for any sign of deception. All she saw was grief raw and genuine carved into the lines around his eyes, weighing down his shoulders beneath the impeccable suit. Peace, she repeated. I don't even know what that would look like. A piano melody drifted through the restaurant as one of the staff began playing softly, preparing for the lunch crowd. The familiar notes of All the Things You Are filled the air, and Sophia watched Maxwell flinch, his composure cracking. That was her song, he said quietly. Elena's. She played it at our wedding. I've known it my whole life, Sophia replied. Never knew why it felt so important. Tony returned with a worn leather photo album. Found it, he announced proudly. My father kept pictures of all his favorite customers. He laid the album on the table, opening it to a page near the middle. Here, the photograph showed a group of young people around a table, the same table where, Sophia and Maxwell now sat. James and Catherine were in the center, his arm around her shoulders, her head tilted toward him in laughter. Elena sat beside them, radiant in a simple sundress, while a younger Maxwell looked on with obvious adoration. Our last dinner here, Maxwell said softly, the night before they announced their engagement to my father. They were so happy, Tony said wistfully. Your father, he nodded to Sophia, ordered champagne for everyone in the place that night. Said everyone should celebrate finding the love of your life. He always was generous to a fault, Maxwell added, even when he couldn't afford it. Tony excused himself as more customers began arriving. Sophia traced her parents' faces in the photograph with a gentle finger. What would they think of me? She asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Maxwell looked surprised. They would be immensely proud, he said without hesitation. James always wanted children, talked about it all the time. And Catherine, she had such plans for the child she didn't yet know she was carrying. What kind of plan? She wanted any child of hers to be raised with an appreciation for both sides of their heritage. She talked about summers in China with your grandmother, learning the language and culture. She was determined that her children would never feel caught between worlds the way she sometimes did. Sophia felt an unexpected pang of loss. I never got that. Grandma tried, but it wasn't the same. No, Maxwell agreed. It wouldn't be. They sat in silence for a moment, the piano melody wrapping around them like a shared memory. There's something else, Sophia said finally. In the evidence Grandma collected, something I don't understand. She pulled out several pages of financial documents from her tote. These are records of payments from a Cayman Islands account to a man named Victor Mercer. Grandma's notes say he was head of security for Reed Industries, but the payments continued long after the accident. Until about 15 years ago. Maxwell frowned, examining the papers. Victor was my father's right hand, his fixer. Officially, he handled corporate security, but unofficially ... He took care of problem. His expression darkened. If my father wanted something to disappear, Victor made it happen. The payments are substantial, hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. Hush money, Maxwell said grimly. Victor knew something. Something worth paying to keep quiet. Do you know where he is now? Sophia asked. He's still alive? Maxwell shook his head. He retired when I took over the company. Moved to Florida, I think. He paused. Actually, my assistant would know. Victor sends a Christmas card every year. He took out his phone and made a quick call. Lauren, I need Victor Mercer's current address. Yes, it's important. Thank you. He hung up. She texted to me. You think he'll talk to us? Sophia asked. After all these years? To me, perhaps. Especially if I offer to match whatever my father was paying him. Wets. Maxwell's mouth set in a hard line. Victor was always practical that way. His phone chimed with a text. He's in Palm Beach. As a condo there, Sophia stared at him. You want to go to Florida now, don't you? Maxwell countered. If anyone knows the truth about what happened on that yacht, it's Victor Mercer. The full truth, not just Margaret's suspicions or my father's cryptic non-denials. Sophia hesitated, torn between the pull of revelation and her responsibilities. I can't just leave. Grandma needs me. My job, your grandmother is receiving excellent care, Maxwell said gently. And as for your job, forgive me, but I think finding out who killed your parents might take precedence over serving dinner at Belafonte's. Put that way. It seemed absurdly trivial. Sophia drew a deep breath. Okay, let's go to Florida. I have a private jet at Teterboro, Maxwell said, already reaching for his phone again. We can be there by dinner. Of course you have a private jet, Sophia muttered, then caught herself. Sorry, I didn't mean... No. You're right to be sardonic about it, Maxwell said with a wry smile. The trappings of wealth become absurd when you step back and look at them. James used to say that all the time. An hour later, they were in Maxwell's sleek town car, heading toward the airport. Sophia had made a quick stop at her apartment to pack an overnight bag and called the care facility to tell them she'd be gone for a day or two. Margaret had sounded tired but unsurprised. Be careful, was all she said. The truth isn't always what we hope for. The Reed Global jet was everything Sophia expected, sleek, luxurious, with leather seats and a private cabin. What she hadn't expected was how uncomfortable Maxwell seemed in it. You don't like flying? She asked as they settled in for takeoff. Not since the accident, he admitted. Irrational, I know. It wasn't a plane crash that killed them. Trauma isn't rational, Sophia said quietly. Maxwell gave her a searching look. You sound like you know something about that. I'm a waitress with a psychology degree I couldn't afford to finish, Sophia replied with a shrug. I've learned enough to recognize when someone's carrying old wounds. And what wounds are you carrying, Sophia Adler? Maxwell asked, his gaze direct. The question caught her off guard. The usual, I suppose. Growing up without parents, always feeling like there was something missing in my life, but not knowing what. And now that you know, Sophia looked out the window as the jet began to taxi. Now I'm angry. At your father for what he might have done. At my grandmother for keeping the truth from me. Even at my mother for not telling anyone she was pregnant before getting on that yacht. She turned back to Maxwell. But not at you. I'm not sure why. You should be, Maxwell said quietly. I suspected the truth about my father for years and did nothing. Built on his legacy, profited from it. Why didn't you leave? Start over somewhere else? Maxwell's expression turned distant. After Elena died, I was... lost. The company became my anchor, the one constant in my life, and if I'm honest, I was afraid. My father had just killed his own son. What might he do if I tried to break away too? The jet accelerated down the runway and lifted into the air. Sophia watched as New York fell away beneath them, the city shrinking to a toy-like miniature, then disappearing into clouds. When we find Victor, she said, what are you going to ask him first? Why? Maxwell said simply. Why did my father do it? Was it really just because he disapproved of James marrying Catherine? Or was there something more? What else could there have been? I don't know. But my father was ruthless, not irrational. James's marriage was a disappointment to him, not a threat. There had to be more to it. The flight attendant brought them drinks water for Sophia, scotch for Maxwell. He took a long sip, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. There's another question that's been bothering me, he said after a while. About your grandmother's evidence, what is it? The payments to Victor continued for 15 years after the accident. Why stop then? What changed? Sophia considered this. Maybe my grandmother knows. We can ask her when we get back. Or maybe Victor will tell us, Maxwell said. He drained his scotch. 15 years after the accident would have been around 1990. I had just been made president of Reed Industries. My father was stepping back, taking an advisory role only. You think that's connected? I think there are no coincidences when it comes to my father, Maxwell said grimly. Everything he did was calculated. Every move had a purpose. The jet leveled off, cruising smoothly through clear skies. Sophia found herself studying Maxwell's profile, the strong jawline so like her father's in the photographs, the eyes that had seen too much, the hands that were never quite still. What will you do, she asked, if we confirm it was murder? If your father really did have them killed? Maxwell met her gaze, his expression resolute. Whatever you want me to do. Release the evidence to the press. Step down as CEO. Dismantle the company and give everything to charity. Just say the word. You do that? Destroy everything you've built? In a heartbeat, Maxwell said. Because none of it was ever really mine to build. It was all founded on James's death, on Elena's, on the life you should have had as a Reed. I've been living on borrowed time and stolen legacy for 30 years. His voice broke slightly. Do you know what my last words to James were? Don't rock the boat. That's what I said to him the day before we sailed. Don't rock the boat. Don't antagonize father. Find a compromise. The cruel irony of those words hung between them. You couldn't have known, Sophia said gently. No, Maxwell agreed, but I should have protected him anyway. That's what big brothers are supposed to do. Palm Beach gleamed in the late afternoon sun, a playground for the wealthy where money washed away inconvenient truths and painful memories. Victor Mercer's condominium was in a pristine oceanfront building with a doorman who recognized Maxwell Reed immediately. Mr. Reed, the doorman said, surprise evident in his voice. Mr. Mercer didn't mention you were coming. It's a surprise visit. Maxwell replied smoothly, slipping the man a $100 bill. An old family matter. The doorman's eyes flicked to Sophia, curious, but he simply nodded and directed them to the 11th floor. Does everyone just recognize you everywhere you go? Sophia asked as they rode the elevator. Maxwell gave a humorless smile. One of the burdens of wealth in a public company. Your face ends up in too many magazines. Must be terrible, Sophia said dryly. Different kinds of prisons, Maxwell replied, surprising her with his candor. Been trapped by financial hardship. I've been trapped by wealth and expectations. Neither is freedom. The elevator doors opened to a plush hallway. They found apartment 1103 and Maxwell pressed the doorbell. A long moment passed before the door swung open to reveal a man in his 70s. Tan, fit, with sharp blue eyes that registered shock, then calculation at the sight of his visitors. Maxwell read, he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. This is ... unexpected. His gaze shifted to Sophia, and the shock returned, more profound than before. His face drained of color. My God, he whispered. You're Catherine's girl. May we come in, Victor? Maxwell asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. Victor hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was what Sophia had expected. Expensive but soulless, like a high-end hotel suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the Atlantic, but there were few personal touches. No photographs, no mementos. I always knew this day might come, Victor said, moving to a wet bar in the corner. Drink? No, Maxwell said. Yes, Sophia countered. Whatever you're having. Victor poured 2 fingers of bourbon into crystal tumblers and handed one to Sophia. He gestured to the seating area, and they arranged themselves, Victor in an armchair, Maxwell and Sophia on the sofa opposite. So, Victor said, taking a sip of his drink, you found out about Catherine's daughter. After all these, he shook his head. Margaret finally broke her silence, I assume. She's dying, Sophia said bluntly. Victor's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry to hear that. She was a formidable woman. He raised his glass in a small toast. Still is, I imagine. We're not here for pleasantries, Victor, Maxwell said. We're here for the truth about what happened on that yacht. Victor's eyes narrowed. After 30 years? Why now? What good could it possibly do? It could give me peace, Sophia said, to know what really happened to my parents. Victor studied her over the rim of his glass. Parents, he repeated. So you know James was your father. Does that make you a Reed, I wonder? Have you come to claim your inheritance? I don't want the Reed fortune, Sophia said sharp. I want to know why my parents were killed. Victor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of respect. Perhaps, what makes you so sure it wasn't an accident? He asked carefully. Maxwell leaned forward. The payments, Victor. For 15 years after the accident, my father paid you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Why? Faithful service, Victor replied with a thin smile. I was with Reed Industries for decades. The payments were from his personal Cayman account, Maxwell pressed, not company fund, and they stopped when I became president. Why? Victor swirled the bourbon in his glass, contemplating. Your father was a complicated man, Maxwell. He was a monster, Maxwell said flatly, and I think you helped him murder my brother and sister-in-law. The accusation hung in the air heavy as a thundercloud. Victor didn't deny it. He simply took another sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving Maxwell's face. What do you think happened that day? Victor asked. I think my father couldn't bear the thought of James marrying Catherine, of the Reed bloodline being contaminated, as he would have seen it. I think he decided to eliminate the problem. Victor nodded slowly. Alexander was certainly a racist. Old money, old ideas. He set his glass down. But you're wrong about his motivation. This wasn't about Catherine being Chinese American. Then what was it about? Sophia asked. Power, Victor said simply. Control. Alexander Reed couldn't tolerate anyone defying him, especially not his own son. James wasn't just marrying outside the approved social circle. He was declaring independence from his father's influence. That was the real threat. Maxwell frowned. That doesn't make sense. My father was controlling, yes, but murder for mere disobedience? Victor laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Mere disobedience? James wasn't just getting married against Alexander's wishes. He was planning to leave Reed Industries entirely. This was clearly news to Max. What? No, he wasn't. He never mentioned. Of course he didn't tell you, Victor interrupted. He knew where your loyalties lay. Always the dutiful son, weren't you, Maxwell? The one who never questioned, never rebelled. Maxwell flinched as if struck. James came to your father 2 days before the yacht trip, Victor continued. Told him he was leaving the company, taking his trust fund, and starting a foundation with Catherine. Something about humanitarian engineering projects in developing countries. Victor shook his head. Alexander was livid. Not just losing face with his society friends over James's choice of bride, but losing his chosen successor? Unacceptable. My father father always favored James, Maxwell said, confusion evident in his voice. He was grooming him to take over. Precisely, Victor agreed. He'd invested everything in James. You were the backup plan, Max. The reliable second son who would do as he was told, but who lacked James's brilliance. The words hit Maxwell like physical blows. Sophia could see the devastation in his eyes, the rewriting of a lifetime of assumptions. So my father arranged the accident, Maxwell said, his voice hollow, to stop James from leaving. Victor nodded. The captain was paid to make sure the yacht encountered difficulties. It was supposed to be a controlled incident, just enough to scare James back into line, to remind him how vulnerable he was, how dependent on his father's good graces. But something went wrong, Sophia said. Everything went wrong, Victor confirmed. The weather turned worse than expected. The controlled incident became a genuine emergency. The yacht capsized too quickly, and James and Elena were trapped below deck. Maxwell finished, his voice barely audible. Elena wasn't supposed to be there at all, Victor said, a flicker of what might have been regret crossing his face. She was collateral damage. As for James Alexander convinced himself afterward that if James had been worthy, he would have survived, that his death was ultimately his own weakness, not Alexander's fault. And Catherine? Sophia asked. My mother? Was she supposed to be on that yacht too? Yes, Victor said simply. Her last-minute illness was pure luck. Alexander was furious when he heard she hadn't boarded. He was sure she'd somehow known that she'd warned James. He looked at Sophia appraisingly. When we learned she was pregnant months later, Alexander wanted to act, but by then she and Margaret had vanished. My men found them eventually, Maxwell said, realization dawning. The security detail I had looking for Catherine after the accident. They reported to you, not me, and I reported to your father, Victor confirmed. We located them when Catherine was 7 months pregnant. Alexander wanted to eliminate the problem, but I convinced him it was too risky. A pregnant woman dying mysteriously after her fiance's asked too many questions. Sophia felt sick. So instead you just watched us for years? At first, Victor said. After Catherine died, Alexander became obsessed with you, Sophia, the grandchild he would never acknowledge. He had me keep surveillance, send reports, your first steps, school performances. He gestured to a briefcase in the corner. I still have the file. 30 years of your life, documented in photographs and reports. My father knew about Sophia all along, Maxwell said, stunned. He never told me. He didn't trust you with that information, Victor said. He was afraid you might develop a conscience, might reach out to her. But the payments, Maxwell pressed. Why did they continue for so long? And why stop when I became president? Victor gave him a look of grudging respect. Now you're asking the right question. He finished his bourbon and set the glass down with deliberate care. Alexander paid me to keep his secrets. All of his secrets. When you took over as president, he decided it was time for a change in our arrangement. What does that mean? Maxwell demanded. It means he decided it was more useful to have leverage over you than to keep paying me, Victor said, reaching for a remote control on the coffee table. I think it's time you saw something. He pressed a button, and the large television on the wall flickered to life. A video began playing grainy security camera footage of a yacht marina. The timestamp showed a date 30 years earlier, the day of the accident. Sophia leaned forward, her heart pounding. On screen, a younger Victor Mercer was speaking with a yacht captain. Money changed hands. And standing in the background watching the exchange was a young Maxwell Reed. That's not possible, Maxwell whispered, his face draining of color as he stared at his younger self on the screen. I wasn't there. You were there, Victor said flatly. You may not remember it the way it happened, but you were there. Sophia felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. She turned to Maxwell, searching his face for confirmation of this betrayal, but all she saw was genuine shock and confusion. I don't understand, Maxwell said, his voice hollow. That day, I was at the office. I didn't go to the marina until later when we were boarding. Victor paused the footage, freezing the image of young Maxwell in the background. Your father made sure you were there. He wanted you implicated, even if you didn't know it at the time. Why? Sophia demanded. Why would Alexander do that to his own son? Insurance, Victor said simply. Alexander Reed never did anything without multiple layers of protection. By having Maxwell present, even unknowingly, he created a witness who could be implicated if things went wrong, and a successor who would never dare turn against him once he understood his own unwitting role. Maxwell stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. I don't remember this, any of it. You were in shock after the accident, Victor said. Grief does strange things to memory, and Alexander helped that process along, subtly reinforcing the version of events he wanted you to remember. Gaslighting his own son, Sophia said, disgust evident in her voice. Alexander saw it as necessary conditioning, Victor replied, creating the perfect successor, one who would never question him because deep down, he feared his own complicity. Maxwell stopped pacing, his back to them as he stared out at the ocean. When did you show him this footage? The day he made you president, Victor said. It was his insurance policy against you ever growing a conscience, against you ever trying to uncover the truth about the accident. And the payments stopped because ... Because Alexander had the ultimate leverage over you, Victor confirmed. This footage, the suggestion of your involvement, he didn't need to pay me to keep secrets anymore. You became the secret keeper. Maxwell turned back to them, his face ashen but composed. And now? Why show us this now? Alexander is dead, Victor said, and I'm an old man with cancer and 6 months to live. The secrets I've kept for the Reed family have become burdensome. He looked at Sophia, and when I saw you, Cather's daughter, with her eyes in James's jawline, I realized some truths need to be told before they're buried forever. Sophia stared at the frozen image on the screen, at the young Maxwell who looked lost, uncertain, nothing like the powerful businessman she had come to know. She tried to reconcile this new information with everything she had learned about her family, about the accident, about Maxwell himself. Did you know? She asked Maxwell directly. Even subconsciously, did some part of you know what your father had done? What you had witnessed? Maxwell met her gaze, his eyes haunted. I've had nightmares for 30 years. Dreams where I'm at the marina, watching something I can't stop. So I always thought they were just manifestations of survivor's guilt. He shook his head slowly, but maybe they were memories trying to surface. Your father was thorough, Victor said. He had a doctor prescribe sedatives after the accident, said you were struggling with anxiety and grief. Those first few weeks are probably hazy in your memory. I barely remember the funerals, Maxwell admitted. The perfect time to rewrite someone's recollection of events, Victor observed. Sophia stood up, moving to the window beside Maxwell. So what really happened that day? The full truth. Victor sighed heavily and resumed the video. The footage showed Alexander Reed arriving, speaking briefly with the captain and Victor, then leaving with Maxwell in tow. The younger Maxwell looked confused, almost dazed. Alexander brought you to the marina that morning, ostensibly to check on the yacht before the trip, Victor narrated. You'd been up all night working on a merge or another of your father's orchestrations. You were exhausted, suggestible. I remember being tired, Maxwell said, his voice distant. He gave me something for a headache, likely mixed with a mild sedative, Victor confirmed. He wanted you present but not fully aware. You waited in the car while he and I spoke with the captain. Then he brought you out, made sure you were visible in the background during the payoff, and took you back to the office. Why bring me out at all? Maxwell asked. Why not leave me in the car? Because he needed a witness who could be compromised, Victor explained. Someone the captain could identify as being present. Insurance against both the captain's potential betrayal and your own future actions. And the accident itself? Sophia pressed. The captain was instructed to take the yacht into rougher waters, then engineer a situation that would frighten James, make him realize how quickly things could go wrong if he defied his father, Victor said. But the storm intensified unexpectedly. The captain panicked, made mistakes, the yacht capsized, and James and Elena died, Maxwell finished, his voice breaking. Yes, Alexander was genuinely shocked when it happened. He hadn't intended deaths, just a scare tactic, but he adapted quickly. Turned tragedy to his advantage. By making me the heir apparent, Maxwell said bitterly, the loyal son who would never leave. Victor nodded. And by reinforcing your dependence on him, your grief made you vulnerable, and he used that. Sophia tried to process the horror of it all, the calculated cruelty, the manipulation, the lives destroyed by one man's need for control. And my mother? What happened after she learned about the accident? She collapsed when she heard the news, Victor said. Was hospitalized briefly. When she recovered, she went straight to Margaret. They disappeared within days. He reached for the briefcase beside his chair. I have the surveillance reports from that time. He opened the case and withdrew a thick folder, handing it to Sophia. Everything is in there. The tracking of Catherine and Margaret after they went into hiding. The discovery of your birth. The years of observation. He paused. And something else. Something I've kept hidden from everyone, including Alexander. Victor pulled out a small USB drive. Catherine left a video message with her lawyer before she went into hiding. It was to be delivered to James if anything happened. When she learned of his death, she asked the lawyer to keep it safe until her child due. Sophia turned 25. From 28, Sophia said, stunned. Why didn't I receive it? The lawyer died before you reached 25. Victor explained. His files were transferred to his partner, who had no knowledge of the arrangement. I learned of the video's existence through Alexander's network of informants and acquired it. He held out the USB drive. It belongs to you. Sophia took it with trembling fingers. Have you watched it? Yes, Victor admitted. I needed to know if it contained anything that might threaten Alexander, but I kept it from him. It was a small act of defiance, perhaps the only one I ever managed against him. What does she say? Maxwell asked quietly. Victor shook his head. That's for Sophia to hear first. Sophia clutched the drive, this unexpected connection to a mother she had barely known. I need to see it. Now. Victor gestured to a laptop on his desk. Be my guest. As Sophia moved to the computer, Maxwell turned to Victor. There's still something I don't understand. If my father had this footage as leverage over me, why didn't he ever use it explicitly? Why the elaborate gaslighting instead of just showing me the video and forcing my compliance? Because Alexander understood power better than anyone, Victor replied. Direct threats create resistance, but subtle manipulation, making someone doubt their own memories, their own culpability, that creates a prison without walls. He looked at Maxwell with something like pity. You've spent 30 years building his company, living his values, because somewhere deep down, you feared what you might discover if you pulled at the threads of the past. Maxwell absorbed this. the truth of it evident in his haunted expression. And the evidence in Margaret's possession? The payments to the captain, the weather reports? All real, Victor confirmed. Alexander was careful but not infallible. Margaret was surprisingly resourceful. Sophia sat at the desk, USB drive in hand, hesitating. I'm not sure I can do this, she admitted, looking back at Maxwell. Hear her voice. See her alive, not knowing what's coming. Maxwell crossed to her side. You don't have to do it now, or alone. I've spent my whole life wondering about her, Sophia said. About both of them. And now ... Now the truth is here, Maxwell finished gently. But it can wait until you're ready. Sophia drew a deep breath and plugged in the USB drive. A video file appeared. For my child. MP4 dated 3 days after the accident. She clicked play. Catherine Chun's face filled the screen. Beautiful, tear-stained, but composed. She was seated in what looked like a lawyer's office, her hands folded protectively over her still flat stomach. My darling, she began, her voice steady despite the evidence of recent tears. If you're watching this, it means two things. I am no longer with you, and you have grown into the adult I can only imagine now. She smiled sadly. I've just learned that I'm carrying you. A life created from the greatest love I've ever known. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face as she heard her mother's voice for the first time in her memory. Your father was James Reed, Catherine continued. He died 3 days ago in what they're calling a boating accident, but it wasn't an accident. His father, Alexander, made it happen. I can't prove it yet, but I know it in my heart. She leaned closer to the camera, her expression intense. I'm going into hiding with my mother to protect you. Alexander Reed is a dangerous man who would stop at nothing to control the Reed legacy. And you, my child, are part of that legacy, whether he acknowledges it or not. Catherine touched her stomach gently. I don't know if you'll be a boy or a girl. I don't know what life will bring us. But I want you to know that you were created in love and that your father would have moved heaven and earth to be with you if he had known of your existence. She wiped away a tear. There's one more thing you should know. Something even James didn't know. Something that might explain Alexander's desperation to end our relationship. Catherine drew a deep breath, steeling herself for the revelation to come. James wasn't Alexander's biological son. The video froze as Catherine's revelation hung in the air. Sophia turned to see Maxwell gripping the edge of the desk, his knuckles white. That's impossible, he whispered. Victor cleared his throat. Not as impossible as you might think. You knew? Maxwell demanded, whirling to face him. I suspected, Victor admitted. Your father had me bury a lot of secrets over the years. This was one I was never explicitly told, but there were ... indications. Sophia pressed play again and her mother's voice continued. Alexander's first wife, Lillian, had an affair with his business partner, Edward Harrington, Catherine explained on the video. James was the result. Alexander discovered the truth when James was a child, but kept it hidden. Lillian died believing her secret was safe. Catherine's expression hardened. I found out by accident. A medical emergency when James and I were traveling. He needed a blood transfusion. The blood type didn't match what it should have been given Alexander's medical records. When I questioned James about it, he dismissed it as a hospital error. She leaned closer to the camera. But I'm a medical researcher. I knew better. I started digging, found old correspondence between Lillian and Edward in the Reed summer house. They confirmed everything. Single quotes. Catherine paused, composing herself. I never told James. I was waiting for the right time. But I confronted Alexander privately, told him I knew the truth. That's when the threats began. Her voice caught. 2 days later, James was dead. The video ended with Catherine's tearful goodbye to the child she might never see grow up, her promise to keep her baby safe, her hope that someday the truth would come to light. Silence filled Victor's apartment as the screen went dark. Sophia sat frozen, trying to absorb this final, stunning revelation. Maxwell looked shell-shocked, his worldview shattered once more. James wasn't a Reed, he said finally, his voice barely audible. That was why. Not Catherine's heritage. Not James leaving the company. My father killed him because he wasn't his biological son. But that doesn't make sense, Sophia protested. If Alexander already knew James wasn't his biological son, why wait so long? Why let him grow up as the heir apparent? Because of Evelyn, Maxwell said, understanding dawning. My mother. She adored James. They were extraordinarily close. If Alexander had revealed the truth while she was alive, he would have lost her. When did your mother die? Sophia asked. 5 years before the accident, Maxwell replied. Cancer, Victor nodded slowly. With Evelyn gone, there was nothing stopping Alexander from eliminating the pretender to the Reed legacy, but he needed to be careful about it, so he arranged an accident. Sophia said bitterly. And when it went wrong, when people actually died, he pivoted. Maxwell continued. Made me the heir instead. The true Reed's son. His laugh was hollow. The irony is that James would have been thrilled to know he wasn't Alexander's biological son. He hated everything our father stood. Your father, Sophia corrected gently. Not his. Maxwell met her eyes. In every way that matters, James was my brother. Blood doesn't change that. Sophia nodded, feeling a surge of warmth toward this man who, just yesterday, had been a stranger to her. Despite everything they had learned, despite the horror of Alexander's action, there was something undeniably good in Maxwell, a capacity for love that his father had never managed to extinguish. So what do we do with this information? She asked. The video, the evidence against Alexander, all of it? That depends, Victor interjected, on what you want to accomplish. He looked between them. Revenge? Justice? Closure? Money? Not money, Sophia said firmly. I told you that already. And revenge against a dead man is pointless, Maxwell added. He turned to Sophia. But justice for your parents? Clearing James's name? Quote, those are worthy goals. Would exposing all this destroy Reed Industries? Sophia asked. Maxwell considered the question. Not necessarily. The company is larger than Alexander's legacy now. It employs thousands of people, does important work in many sectors, but it would certainly cause upheaval, and the Reed name would be forever tainted. It already is, Sophia said quietly, just in secret. Victor retrieved his bourbon and poured himself another glass. There's another consideration, he said. Reed Industries is currently involved in several major medical research initiatives. Cancer treatments, vaccines for developing. If the company's reputation is destroyed, that work could be jeopardized. Sophia frowned. That sounds suspiciously like emotional manipulation. Just facts, Victor replied with a shrug. What you do with them is your choice. Maxwell hadn't taken his eyes off Sophia. Whatever you decide, he said, I'll support you. If you want to go public with everything, I'll stand beside you at the press conference. If you want to keep it private, find another kind of resolution. I'll help with that too. His sincerity was unmistakable, and Sophia felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. I need to talk to my grandmother, she said finally. This affects her too. Of course, Maxwell agreed. Sophia stood, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. But first I need sleep and time to process ... All of this. You can stay at my place here in Palm Beach, Victor offered. Guest room is made up. No point flying back tonight, Maxwell nodded. He's right. We'll head back first thing tomorrow. He turned to Victor. We'll need copies of everything. All the files, the video, the security footage. Victor gestured to the briefcase. Take it all. I've kept these secrets for too long. They're your burden now. Sophia couldn't sleep. The guest room in Victor's apartment was luxurious, a far cry from her cramped studio in Queens. But the revelations of the day kept replaying in her mind. Her mother's face on the video, the truth about her grandfather, the knowledge that her parents' deaths had been deliberate, not accidental. A soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. Yes, she called. Maxwell's voice came through the door. I can't sleep either. I thought maybe you'd like some tea. Sophia hesitated, then got up and opened the door. Maxwell stood there in shirt sleeves, looking as exhausted as she felt, holding 2 mugs of steaming tea. Chamomile, he said, offering her one. My mother always said it helped with insomnia. Thanks. Sophia took the mug and stepped aside to let him enter. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, each sipping their tea. I keep thinking about them, Sophia said finally. James and Catherine. Elena, the life they should have had, the life I should have had with them. Maxwell nodded, his eyes distant. I do that too. Have done it for 30 years. Imagining the alternative timeline where they lived, where Elena and I had children, where James changed the world with his humanitarian projects, where I grew up knowing my father, Sophia added softly. Knowing you, I would have been the fun uncle, Maxwell said with a sad smile. The one who spoiled you rotten on your birthdays, taught you to drive, threatened your first boyfriend. The image was so vivid, so achingly possible that Sophia felt tears rising again. Instead, we're strangers piecing together a murder mystery. Not quite strangers anymore, Maxwell observed. Sophia studied him. This man who had lost as much as she had to Alexander Reed's ruthlessness. No, she agreed. Not strangers. When I heard you singing in the restaurant, Maxwell said, his voice low. It was like being struck by light. Elena used to sing that song exactly the same way, the same phrasing, the same slight catch on the high notes. He shook his head in wonder. How's that possible? You never even knew her. Music is in the blood, my grandmother always said, Sophia replied. Some things can't be taught, only inherited. Like James's jawline, Maxwell added, and Catherine's eyes. They fell silent again. But it was a comfortable silence now, the quiet understanding between two people connected by both tragedy and blood. Whatever we decide to do about Alexander's legacy, Sophia said eventually, I think I'd like to know more about my parents, about Elena. The real stories, not just the tragedy. I'd like that too, Maxwell replied. I have photo albums, home videos, letters Elena wrote me when we were first dating, James's college thesis that he was so proud of. A genuine smile crossed his face. Did you know your father was obsessed with ancient engineering technique? He wrote his thesis on Roman aqueduct. I didn't know that, Sophia said, smiling back. Tell me more. As the night deepened around them, Maxwell shared stories of the brother he had loved and lost, James's brilliant mind, his dry wit, his passion for using engineering to help others rather than simply build wealth. He told her about Catherine's quiet determination, her medical research, how she had stood up to Alexander at a dinner party when he made a racist comment, earning James's instant admiration. And he told her about Alana, her music, her laughter, the way she could charm a room full of strangers within minutes. Sophia soaked it all in. These precious glimpses of the people who had given her life. For the first time, they became real to her, not just names or faces in photographs, but fully formed human beings with dreams and flaws and love to give. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside Victor's apartment, Sophia realized she had made her decision about the evidence, about Alexander's legacy, about what justice would look like for her parents. I know what I want to do, she said. Maxwell, who had been mid-story about James's college graduation, stopped and looked at her. What's that? I want to reclaim the Reed name, Sophia said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. Not destroy it, transform it. Make it stand for something good, for what James and Catherine would have done with their foundation for humanitarian engineering. How? I want to establish the James and Catherine Reed Foundation, funded by Reed Industries. Not as a PR move or to whitewash the past, but as genuine atonement. And I want to tell their story, the real story, in my own way. On my own term. Maxwell's expression shifted from surprise to something like hope. What about Alexander's crimes? The truth about the accident? We use the leverage of what we know to ensure Reed Industries becomes what James would have wanted it to be, Sophia replied. We don't bury the truth, but we don't let it destroy everything either. We transform the legacy instead of just tearing it down. We? Maxwell asked, that spark of hope growing stronger. Yes, Sophia said firmly. I can't do this alone, and neither can you. And besides, she added with a small smile, I think I'd like to know my uncle properly, make up for lost time. For the first time since she'd met him, Maxwell Reed looked truly at peace. They flew back to New York the next morning, the Reed Global jet slicing through clear blue skies. The pilot announced their descent into Teterboro with practiced professionalism, seemingly unaware that his passenger's world had been irrevocably altered. Sophia sat with Catherine's video playing on a laptop, the sound muted, watching her mother's lips move, memorizing the contours of her face. I've watched Elena's home videos hundreds of times, Maxwell said, breaking the silence, searching for something I might have missed, some warning I should have heeded. Sophia closed the laptop gently. Did you ever find it? No, he admitted. Just the ordinary moments that become extraordinary once you know they're finite. The car ride from the airport to Lakeside Care Center passed in contemplative silence. Sophia clutched the USB drive and the file of evidence, simultaneously eager and dreading to share everything with her grandmother. She'll say she was right about the Reeds all along, Sophia said as they pulled up to the facility. Maxwell gave a rueful smile. She was. Margaret was in the solarium again, but sitting in a wheelchair now rather than the recliner. The decline in just 2 days was shocking, her cheeks more hollow, her breathing labored, but her eyes lit up when she saw Sophia, then narrowed at the sight of Maxwell behind her. You went to Florida, she stated, not a question. We found Victor Mercer, Sophia confirmed, kneeling beside her grandmother's chair. And we learned everything, Grandma. About Alexander, about James not being his biological son. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. Catherine knew? She found out accidentally, Sophia explained, and confronted Alexander about it. That's what got her killed, Margaret whispered, the pieces finally falling into place for her too. Not just James's defiance or her heritage. Alexander couldn't risk the truth coming out. There's more, Sophia said, taking her grandmother's frail hand. Mom left a video message for me. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She did? Can I, of course, Maxwell interjected, stepping forward with the laptop. We brought it to show you. They watched Catherine's message together, Margaret clutching Sophia's hand so tightly it hurt. When it ended, the older woman was openly weeping. My beautiful girl, she said. So brave even then. She thought of everything, Sophia said, making this video, protecting me, gathering evidence. She was always the practical one, Margaret said with a watery smile. Even as a child. Elena was the dreamer, Catherine the planner. She looked at Maxwell. You've seen everything now. The proof of what Alexander did. Maxwell nodded, his face somber. Yes, and, Margaret demanded, what will you do with it? Before Maxwell could answer, Sophia spoke. That's what we came to discuss with you, Grandma. I have an idea about how to handle this all, but I want your input. She outlined her plan, establishing the James and Catherine Reed Foundation, transforming the Reed legacy rather than destroying it, using the leverage of the truth to ensure the company became a force for good. You want to take the Reed name? Margaret asked, clearly shocked, after everything they did to our family. Not they, Grandma. Him. Alexander. And he's gone. Sophia squeezed her grandmother's hand. This isn't about forgiving or forgetting, it's about reclaiming, taking back what was stolen from us and reshaping it into something good. Margaret looked to Maxwell. And you'd support this? With everything I have, he replied. It's what James would have wanted, to use the Reed resources for humanitarian purposes. And it would be a fitting memorial for Catherine and Elena too. Margaret was silent for a long moment, studying both their faces. You two have become quite the team in just a few days, she observed. We share a history now, Sophia said simply. And a future, I hope. Margaret reached for Maxwell's hand, surprising both him and Sophia. I spent 30 years hating your family, she said. Hating you by extension. I was wrong about that part. You're not your father. No, Maxwell agreed. But I helped build his empire, carried on his legacy without questioning it. There's blood on my hands too, even if indirectly. And this foundation is your atonement? Part of it, he acknowledged. The rest is personal. Between me and my conscience. Margaret nodded slowly. Catherine would approve of your plan, Sophia. She never wanted destruction, only justice and a chance to build something meaningful. She released Maxwell's hand. I give you my blessing. Sophia felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you, Grandma. Now, Margaret said, her voice firming, tell me more about this foundation. And when you plan to announce it, they spent the next hour outlining details. Maxwell made calls to his lawyers, starting the process of establishing the foundation and allocating initial funding. Sophia began drafting a statement about her parents' story, the truth of their deaths, and the path forward. As evening approached, Margaret's energy flagged visibly. The nurse came to take her back to her room, reminding them gently of visiting hours. I want to attend the announcement, Margaret insisted as they prepared to leave. Whatever it takes. Wheelchair, oxygen, I don't care. I want to be there when the world learns who Catherine and James really were. You will be. Sophia promised, kissing her grandmother's forehead. Front and center. Outside the care facility, Maxwell turned to Sophia. "You can't go back to waiting tables at Bellefonte's," he said. "Not with everything that's happening." "I need to work," she replied. "Rent doesn't pay itself. Stay at my place," he offered. "The guest suite is larger than your entire apartment, and it would make coordinating the foundation launch much easier." Sophia hesitated. "That's a big step." "It's practical," Maxwell countered. "And temporary if you prefer. Just until we get through the next few weeks." The offer was tempting. Her tiny apartment in Queens felt like it belonged to another life now. A life before she knew about James and Catherine, before she understood who she truly was. "All right," she agreed. But just until things settled down, Maxwell's penthouse was exactly as Sophia had imagined it. Minimalist, expensive, with spectacular views of Central Park. But unlike Victor's soulless condo, Maxwell's home showed signs of actual living. Books stacked on side tables, a half-finished chess game on a board by the window. Photographs, not the formal portraits she'd expected, but candid shots of younger days. Elena laughing on a beach, James on a hiking trail. The four of them, James, Catherine, Elena, and Maxwell, at what looked like a picnic. "You kept their photos out," Sophia observed, surprised. "Even after all these years." Maxwell nodded. "They're my family, the only real family I ever had." He showed her to the guest suite, which was indeed larger than her entire apartment. As she unpacked the few things she'd brought from Palm Beach, she felt the strangeness of her situation wash over her. A week ago, she'd been Sophia Adler, waitress, struggling to make ends meet. Now she was Sophia Reed, heiress to a complicated legacy, niece to one of America's wealthiest men. "This is going to take some adjustment," she murmured to herself. Over dinner takeout from a Thai place Maxwell swore was the best in the city, they began planning in earnest. "The press conference should be next week," Maxwell said. "We'll need time to prepare statements, brief key executives, get everything in order legally, and time for Grandma to get stronger," Sophia added. "I want her to be part of this, but her health ... single quotes. I've arranged for a specialist to see her tomorrow," Maxwell said. "The best oncologist in the country. He can't work miracles, but he might be able to improve her quality of life, manage her pain better." Sophia set down her fork. "You didn't have to do that. I did, actually," Maxwell replied. "For Margaret, for Catherine, for you," he sighed, "for myself. 30 years of doing nothing while knowing something was wrong. ... It's time I started doing right by your family." "Our family," Sophia corrected gently. Maxwell smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Our family." Later that night, unable to sleep in the too soft, too large bed, Sophia wandered to the living room. She found Maxwell at the chessboard, contemplating a move. "James and I used to play," he said without looking up. "He always won. Said I was too predictable, too cautious." "Teach me?" Sophia asked, settling into the chair opposite him. Maxwell looked up, surprised. "Now? Why not? We're both awake, and I want to know the things he loved." Maxwell reset the board, explaining each piece's movement, the strategy, the objective. Sophia listened intently, making connections to the father she'd never known. "He would have taught you this," Maxwell said, showing her how the knight moved, "probably before you were 5. James believed chess taught critical thinking." "What did Elena love?" Sophia asked. "Besides music." "Poetry," Maxwell replied immediately. "Russian literature, swimming in the ocean no matter how cold it was, arguing about politics." He smiled at the memories. "She would have taught you to stand your ground, to never back down when you believed in something. And my mother? Science, truth, justice. She had a brilliant mind for research, and she loved your father completely, fearlessly." Maxwell moved a pawn. "Your move." As they played through the night, the pieces moving across the board, Sophia felt a strange sense of homecoming, not to this apartment or to the Reed name, but to the truth of who she was, the daughter of James and Catherine, niece to Elena and Maxwell, granddaughter to Margaret, a woman composed of all these histories, all these loves and losses. Tomorrow they would begin the work of transformation of the Reed legacy, of the truth, of their shared future. But tonight, in the quiet hours before dawn, they simply existed together, beginning to heal wounds 30 years in the making. 1 week later, Sophia stood in the green room of the Reed Global headquarters, watching a makeup artist apply the final touches to her grandmother's face. Margaret sat straight in her wheelchair, dignity intact despite the oxygen tube in her nose. The oncologist Maxwell had brought in had worked minor miracles with her pain management, giving her clarity and strength for this day. "You look beautiful, Grandma," Sophia said, squeezing her shoulder gently. "Your mother would be proud of you," Margaret replied. "Both of you," she added, nodding to Maxwell, who stood by the window in a somber charcoal suit. The press conference was scheduled for noon. Every major news outlet had a representative in the auditorium, drawn by the mysterious announcement from Reed Global's reclusive CEO and an unknown woman claiming connection to the family. "Are you nervous?" Maxwell asked Sophia. She smoothed the jacket of her navy suit borrowed from Maxwell's assistant, tailored overnight to fit her perfectly. "Terrified," she admitted, "but certain." Maxwell nodded. In the past week, they had become partners in this unlikely mission, the transformation of a legacy built on lies. The James and Catherine Reed Foundation was officially established, with initial funding of $500 million from Reed Global. Legal documents were prepared, statements crafted, executives briefed. "It's time," Maxwell's assistant announced from the doorway. As they made their way toward the auditorium, Sophia felt a strange, calm descend. She was about to step into the spotlight, reveal herself as James Reed's daughter, and publicly accuse her grandfather of murder. Yet she felt more herself than she had in her entire life. The stage was set with 3 chairs behind a podium bearing the Reed Global logo. As they entered, camera flashes erupted like lightning. Maxwell took the podium first, his face composed but grave. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today, Reed Global is making an announcement that will fundamentally alter the narrative of our company's history. It is a difficult truth, long buried, that we now choose to acknowledge." He gestured to Sophia, who moved forward to stand beside him. "I'd like to introduce Sophia Reed Adler. Sophia is the daughter of my brother James Reed and his fiancée Catherine Shun, who were killed in a yacht accident 30 years ago." A murmur rippled through the crowd as cameras clicked frantically. "What many of you don't know is that the accident was not an accident at all," Maxwell continued, his voice steady. "It was orchestrated by my father, Alexander Reed, to prevent James from leaving the company and revealing a secret that Alexander had kept hidden for decades." The room fell silent, reporters leaning forward, recording devices extended. "James was not Alexander's biological son," Maxwell revealed. "When James discovered this and planned to leave Reed Industries to establish a humanitarian foundation with Catherine, Alexander took steps to silence them permanently." Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Maxwell continued, outlining the evidence they had uncovered. The testimony from Victor Mercer, the video Catherine had left behind. He spoke of his own unwitting complicity, his decades of suspicion without action, the empire he had built on a foundation of blood. Then it was Sophia's turn. She stepped to the podium, her hands steady on its edges. "I grew up never knowing my father or mother," she said. "My grandmother Margaret Chun raised me in relative poverty while across the city. The Reed fortune grew, a fortune that should have included support for James's child." She gestured to Margaret, who sat proudly in her wheelchair at the side of the stage. "Last week I was working as a waitress at Belafonte's restaurant when Maxwell Reed heard me singing a song that his late wife, Elena, my aunt by marriage, used to sing. That chance encounter led to the unraveling of 30 years of secrets and lies." Sophia outlined their plan for the James and Catherine Reed Foundation. Its focus on humanitarian engineering projects in developing nations, the dream her parents had never been able to realize. "We are not here to destroy Reed Global," she concluded. "We are here to transform it, to reclaim the Reed legacy from the darkness of Alexander's crimes and rebuild it as a force for good in the world." Questions erupted from the press corps, but Maxwell stepped in, directing the conversation with practiced skill. "Yes, Victor Mercer had provided a full confession. Yes, legal authorities had been notified, though prosecution was complicated by the passage of time and Alexander's death. No, Sophia was not seeking financial compensation beyond the establishment of the foundation. Yes, she would be taking a role in Reed Global as co-director of the foundation with Maxwell." When it was over, when the final questions had been answered and the cameras stopped rolling, Sophia felt lightheaded with relief and exhaustion. It was done. The truth was out. Her parents' story had been told. "You did beautifully," Margaret said as they made their way back to the green. "Catherine would have been so proud. James too," Maxwell added. "He always said the truth would set you free." "I think I finally understand what he meant." That evening, after Margaret had been settled back at Lakeside with a private nurse, Maxwell surprised Sophia with an unexpected suggestion. "Let's go to Belafonte's," he said, "where it all began." "Why?" Sophia asked, puzzled. "To complete the circle," Maxwell replied, "and because I never properly finished my meal that night." Belafonte's was buzzing with activity when they arrived, the news of the press conference having spread throughout the city. Pierre, the floor manager, nearly fainted when he saw Sophia enter alongside Maxwell Reed. "Miss Reed," he stammered. "We weren't expecting or ever again, honestly." "I'm not here to work, Pierre," Sophia assured him. "Just to dine." They were seated at Maxwell's regular table, the same one where he had dropped his wine glass a week earlier. The other patrons tried to pretend they weren't staring, but the whispers were audible. The Reed scandal was already the talk of the city. "Does it bother you?" Sophia asked, nodding toward the curious glances. "Being the subject of gossip?" "I've been the subject of gossip my entire adult life," Maxwell replied with a wry smile, "though admittedly not quite like this." They ordered scallops for him again, salmon for her, and sat in comfortable silence as the restaurant hummed around them. "I never got to thank you," Maxwell said suddenly. "For what? For singing that night? For bringing Elena's voice back to me even for a moment?" His eyes grew distant. I'd forgotten how it felt to hear it, to remember her not just as a loss, but as the vibrant, beautiful woman she was. "I wish I'd known her," Sophia said softly. "You would have loved each other," Maxwell assured her. "She had a gift for seeing people's true selves. She saw mine even when I couldn't." Their food arrived, and Maxwell raised his wine glass more carefully this time. "To James and Catherine," he said. "To Elena. And to the legacy they deserved but never lived to see. To family," Sophia added. "Found and reclaimed." As they ate, Sophia watched. Maxwell, this man who had been a stranger a week ago and was now the closest family she had besides her grandmother. She saw the weight that had lifted from his shoulders, the straight posture that came not from rigid control but from finally standing in truth. "What happens now?" she asked. "After the foundation launch, after the press dies down, life," Maxwell said simply. "For the first time in 30 years, I think I might actually try living instead of just existing. He considered her across the table. What about you? Will you stay at Reed Global? Take your rightful place as James's daughter? Sophia twirled her wine glass thoughtfully. I think so. Not for the money or the name, but for the chance to do what they would have done, to use the Reed resources for good. She smiled. Besides, someone needs to keep you honest. Maxwell laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound. Fair enough. As they finished their meal, the pianist in the corner began to play a familiar melody. All the things you are drifted through the restaurant, and both Sophia and Maxwell still listening. Without thinking, Sophia began to hum along, the notes rising naturally to her lips. She saw Maxwell's eyes grow bright with unshed tears, not of grief this time, but of remembrance and appreciation. Sing, he encouraged softly, please. And so she did, her voice low and clear in the hushed restaurant. She sang for Elena, for Catherine, for James, for Maxwell and Margaret, for the grandparents she had never known, the aunt she had never met, the father who had never held her. And as she sang, she felt them all around her, not as ghosts of the past, but as parts of herself, finally acknowledged, finally embraced. When the last note faded, she opened her eyes to find not just Maxwell watching her, but the entire restaurant captivated. For a moment there was silence, then applause, gentle at first, then building, washing over her like a benediction. Maxwell reached across the table and took her hand, his eyes full of a peace she had never seen there before. Welcome home, Sophia Reed, he said. Welcome home. 6 months later, Sophia stood on a stage in a remote village in Kenya, watching as clean water flowed from a newly installed well system. The James and Catherine Reed Foundation's first major project was complete, bringing sustainable water access to a community of 5,000 people. Beside her, Maxwell beamed with genuine pride. Margaret sat in her wheelchair, thinner but still present, determined to witness as much of her granddaughter's work as possible before her time came. They would have loved this, Maxwell said, watching children splash in the fresh water. They do love it, Sophia replied. Through us. That evening, as the African sunset painted the sky in impossible colors, Sophia found herself humming the familiar melody, Lena's song, her mother's lullaby, her own anthem of remembrance and hope. The voice that had once brought back painful memories now carried their legacy forward. A promise kept, a circle completed, a new beginning born from an ending long deferred.